Good day, everyone. Welcome to Birth Moms Real Talk Facebook Live. We come at you every other Saturday, Saturdays a month, with bringing on people that you may have heard on podcasts talking about a different topic, and you may have seen them or heard them before. So you get the real deal, the real talk with these Facebook Lives. So tune in, those of you listening and tied in, you subscribing. So you're probably getting noticed. Just click that button and come in. Leave us some comments, because even though you're not here with one of ours and speaking as a guest, then you can put your comments in and we'll talk about your comments. Now, the topic today, three different topics: interracial adoption, the Black experience, and the steps to healing. That is always something in the adoption constellation that we'll talk about. But I want to thank all of you who are listening to the podcast, Birth Moms Real Talk. I'm hearing from you. And Birth Moms, it must be springtime because you're coming out the woodwork saying you want to tell your story, tell your story. So I'm so happy about that. And the tremendous support that we've had since we've launched June 26th of last year. So we're coming up on 1 year, Damon. Believe it or not, the time has flown about. Yes, indeed. So thank you for the emails you're sending in. Support us. Go on our website, birthmomsrealtalk.com, click that Patreon button, as well as Birth Mothers. We have created a special private group for you. We have a private Facebook. We do a private Zoom once a month. And we actually are reading Primal Wound. So that will take place April 26th. So join the village. So let's just kick it off. I'm going to ask my guests to introduce themselves, tell on, I guess, what part of the triad they fit in with it and fitting into the discussion. So Ruby, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Well, thanks, Yvonne. Good to see you and you, Damon, and anyone who's able to listen. It's just such an honor and a privilege. I gave birth to a mixed race daughter in 1971, March of 1971. And I was in a home for unwed mothers in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. And I surrendered her to adoption. It was a great big deal. I did not want to. As Yvonne and I have spoken in the past, I did not want to. But it was 1970. I was in a biracial relationship. That was not a popular choice in my household and in the larger part of my community, really. And I was convinced I was going to get married, but the father was convinced I was not. And so the only other option that was presented to me was to go away. I went away for 5 months and had this baby girl. And I was able to, the short story is I was able to make a phone call to her adoptive parents in 1994, January of 1994. My daughter was just about to turn 23, and we reunited. And we had a 25-year reunion prior to her. Finally, I just kept bugging her birth father's family to meet her. Finally, his sister met her. I still couldn't convince him to meet her. And then he passed away unexpectedly, suddenly in 2017, having never met her. But she was invited to the funeral, and we all went to the funeral. My partner and I, my daughter and her husband, my granddaughter, because in reunion, I met my granddaughter for the first time when she was turning 4. And at any rate, that meeting, some other stories were told, some other perspectives were shared about what may or may not have happened and how the decision was made to surrender her. And so our relationship fractured at that point in time, and we struggled a little bit a couple of times over the last, since 2017 to connect. And we just haven't been able to without, she's very angry. She's, and I'm going to say understandably, but I really don't understand. But I can imagine she's dealing with a lot of racial identity issues right now. The climate of the country in the recent past, her whole childhood. She was the first She was the first Black person in her community.
Wow.
And when she was adopted at the age of 3 months, again, she was hard to place because there were a lot of, I always say this, and I hope I'm not offending anyone, but there were a lot of blonde, blue-eyed baby boys that were available to be adopted at that time. And
Okay.
I had a wonderful friendship with her mother. She
Okay.
welcomed me into their family.
So let me ask you, because that's why we're doing this. We do this live, and I always, and Damon has heard me say this, we set the precedent of talking live on Facebook, not in a closed room, not in a corner or whatever, because this is a discussion that needs to happen. The interracial adoption is whether a Black child is adopted by whites or there's a biracial child adopted by whatever race, but you've got that interracial with that. And whether people are talking about it, whether the child is the first Black or only Black or whatever, that has its effect when you talk about equality, identity, and all of that. So we're going to talk about all of that. So come to Damon and let him introduce and see not only his perspective, but his story. And then we'll get into the topics.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Damon Davis. I'm the host of the Who Am I Really podcast. It's a podcast where adoptees get the opportunity to share their own adoption journey. And it's everything from amazing adoptions and horrible reunions to horrible adoptions, amazing reunions, and every mix of race, culture, geography, religion that you can imagine. That is basically what the adoption constellation is made of. So for my own story, I am in a homogenous family in adoption. Both of my parents are Black. I'm also an adoptive parent, and my children are Black. They are kinship adoptees in that they are my niece and nephew from my wife's side of the family. I can relate to the racial issues that a person might have, as my wife is biracial. Her mother is white Canadian. Her father was Black from the Caribbean. And funny story, if you can see right over my shoulder here, these zebras are representative of my wife and my son, who is a mix of the two of us. So anytime you see those zebras, just know that that is something that is very special to my wife. But
Yeah.
In my own story, you know, I was very fortunate to be able to find my biological mother after my son was born. It was like this moment of realizing that he was the first biological relative that I had ever known in my entire life. And it's such a moment of realization for so many adoptees when they have children, that it really does spark a lot of curiosity about where they came from when they were children. But I was very fortunate in that she was receptive to meeting me, and we had a good relationship as we were going forward. We lasted 6 years until her passing, and unfortunately, in her passing, she went to her grave without the knowledge of who my birth father was, because she told me it was one person when in fact ancestry DNA shared that it was a completely different person. So this other gentleman, Bill, has been amazing. He's very receptive. We look alike, just the same way that Anne and I, my birth mother, look alike. And it's been a really sort of amazing set of reunions. I guess the only sort of tragedy really is that one, my biological mother went to her grave not knowing the truth, and two, as a side story, my adoptive mother unfortunately suffers mental illness, and so she's not able to really grasp what has transpired in my life since mental illness took her away from us. So she's very much physically alive, but she's not in touch with any of the issues that, we've been dealing with here. And among those issues that we deal with on the podcast are things like what the topics are here on today's broadcast. It's, things like interracial adoption and transracial adoption, interracial families, and just, people being of mixed race and trying to struggle through their own identity. Because I think that it's multifaceted. There's the individual who is struggling in, as you've said, Ruby, this climate of this country where there's a lot of tension between the Black and white community for a variety of reasons. And so a person who is of mixed race in that specific way, and I think we can agree mixed race comes in a variety of different combinations, but in this specific combination, it's incredibly, incredibly challenging. because there is anger and judgment and misinformation on both sides. Yet
Yeah.
you as an individual are comprised of both sides. So I would
Right.
imagine it's incredibly challenging to try to reconcile your own identity
Hmm.
in this space. So, I've spoken to a variety of adoptees on the show who have expressed their different experiences in different cultures, be it, as was said, Ruby, being the first Black person in their community or one of the few. It makes them an outcast, and that can be incredibly challenging. So I could go on, but the show has been really enlightening for me to help me understand the adoption experience for individuals who are maybe Black, who were adopted by a white family.
Hmm.
Another issue I'm sure that we're going to cover today, which is
Yeah.
how do you reconcile your own identity in a family that hopefully loved you, but that you have a different racial identity from, and you're living in this current environment as well. There's a lot of challenge out there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the topic itself, as you say, whether you call it is transracial, interracial, and if you're biracial, you are of both two races. So, am I Black today? Am I white today? Where are you with that? Then the other experience too, when I say the Black experience, and I do have, I'm a Black birth mom, and Damon, you're a Black adoptee. I'm scheduled to have a Black adoptive mom. There is a Black experience, and I call it the Black experience because me as a Black birth mom, I don't relate to a lot of things that Ruby and I have had conversations, other birth moms have conversations, and typically is like, and I've gotten this question, well, Yvonne, where did you go? What do you mean, where did I go? Did you go to a unwed mother's home? This was 1973. No, there weren't any. So that was my experience for is the expectation that we all were in the same boat or whatever you want to call it as being birth moms. But my experience was different than other moms who were not Black. And so we needed to talk about that. And when I said that, and I've said that in different circumstances and conferences and whatever, and it was like, revelation, really? Yeah. And we have to understand that just because we're in one situation together, it's not the same with that. And quite frankly, and I've spoken about this myself directly in conferences and whatever, that in the adoption constellation with conferences, and Damon, you've been there too, there typically are not to expect as many Blacks or whatever. The last large conference I went to in 2019, I was one Black out of 200. That was birth moms, adoptees, and adoptive mom. And it happened that the This Is Us producer of the TV show was there. And I kidded with her and said, I'm the Randall in the room. I was a Randall in the room. And it was looking at me and looking for as my experience. And when I share my experience, it was like they really couldn't relate. And that was my time. I called it my education to put on my professor and teacher. Well, let me share with you. If you do not know, let me share with you. And that's what it's called for, a dialogue. Just like we're having this live dialogue here now about, for as Ruby, your daughter of being the only Black in the community or whatever else, that takes its effect. Separate aside from adoption, that's just a racial identity thing or whatever with that. Then with the Black experience, it's like, okay, Black versus non-Black or whatever. So my question to you first, Damon, did you see any difference? Because you're definitely younger than I am in your era and coming up of being not only adoptee, that was one characteristic, but being Black and what you experienced. Were you in a biracial community? Were you had Black friends, white friends, or whatever? Can you talk about
Yeah. So in my experience, I in some ways was lucky because I grew up middle class Black family and in Columbia, Maryland, which is a planned community. And if anybody knows anything about Columbia, and I want to say it's Roslyn. There's another community
Yeah,
around here. It's Roslyn.
Yeah.
That were developed with the intention of mixing race, socioeconomic status, really trying to bring more of a utopian look at what society could be like, and bring some racial and economic harmony to multiple communities at the same time. So I had this interesting experience of being a Black family in a predominantly white community, but a very racially mixed community as compared with most others. You know, when you drive into a city, you can pretty much tell like the Asians live over there, the white
Mhm.
folks live over there, the black folks live over here, etc. Like there's very you can tell where the street line is in many instances where various cultures live together, and it wasn't necessarily like that as much in Colombia. My experience, I attended a historically black college, and when I went to this HBCU, Hampton University, it was then that I really started to identify with race. Um, it's unfortunate as I realize it as I'm speaking about it in this moment that I didn't speak about being adoptee very much when I was at Hampton, and I now wish that I had. I would have
Mhm.
loved to have known who among my college
Right.
friends and acquaintances was an adoptee. I spoke about it openly when I was in high school, and I guess it just didn't come up, or I didn't raise it, or I was trying to find myself in other ways
Okay.
such that adoption wasn't the thing that I was focused on when I went to
Right.
college. So it would be interesting to go back and learn who among my friends there were adoptees. But my experience, I feel I was fairly lucky in
Okay.
that I had sort of good acceptance from a lot of different communities at different times.
Okay.
My sense, though, was that that was not the case for a great many people. And I've spoken with adoptees on the podcast who have told me, you know, one guy that sticks out in my mind, his name escapes me at the moment, but the gentleman said that he lived in like northernmost Canada. He's a black
Mhm.
guy, big dude, and he, you know, in northern Canada in this logging community that he lived in, you can imagine he was like one of maybe two people of color. The others were indigenous folks, and so between him and them, there was some discrimination against those folks, and
Yeah.
it was very ostracizing to be the
Right.
lone standout in a community like that. And he talked a lot about his own racial identity and sort of this connection that he finally had. To summarize his story, he basically said, you know, his mother was white, his father was black from the Caribbean. And, you know, when he met his mother, you know, he enjoyed the experience of meeting with her, but he was definitely looking for the black connection. He had
Right.
had the white connection because he had lived in a white community in Canada for a very long time. He said when he traveled to Jamaica, you know, he met his Caribbean relatives and they were just like, that's my blood. And they just connected and bonded. And it was a unifying experience for him because he had not had any real black experience before.
Wow.
And
Wow.
I think that that happens a lot, that
Mhm.
folks who grow up, I know I can think of at least two other people who told me that they grew up in a white family in, you know, predominantly white towns in, say, you know, the Midwest. And it's, it feels good to have the love of family, but it also feels good to have some level of mirroring in your family and in your community. And in the absence of all mirroring, you stand alone.
Mhm.
You know, my friend Julie said that she was discovered that she's basically like an Afro Latina, and in her family, they were two white parents who had adopted a bunch of different children of a variety of races. She has, I believe, an Asian brother, and the parents had one child of their own. So she has, I think, a white sister, and then there was herself. So in the family, nobody was different because everybody was different, but you're
Right. Yeah.
still everybody's different, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So eventually she ended up finding her family and making this connection out, though I thought she was black when I met her, and she thought she grew up thinking she was black, and eventually she met her natural family and found this Latino connection that she had never had before and is totally into and feels really connected and grounded with now. And
Mhm.
so I guess all of that to say there's so much to adoption in not knowing who you are in the first place,
Yes. In the
right?
first place. In the
I
first place. Yeah.
Yeah, as a black man in a black family, I still had the questions like, well,
Right.
if I'm adopted over here, then who are the people I come from over here?
Huh?
So there's that. But then you
Yeah.
take that and you add on to it additional layers of race
Yeah.
and additional layers of not understanding who you actually are. In the instance of Julie, thinking you're black, but realizing you're Latino. There's another guy who I remember who he grew up thinking he was white, and then he went to college and everybody saw him and was like, "You're clearly black." And he
Right.
just hadn't known it, right? And he
Yeah.
ended up discovering that he was of black descent as well.
Right.
It's just, it can be really daggone confusing, and I think
That's
it's
it.
important for people to,
Absolutely. Yeah.
go on and
Of getting clarity, as you say, finding out
yeah,
truly who are you really? Who are you really? Yeah.
us the
And
show.
Ruby, coming back to you, you talked about Forrest in being in a biracial relationship and having a biracial child. So obviously during that time there, as you say, it wasn't accepted and so forth. So what was your hope or wish that when you did place your daughter, that first of all, her adoptive parents, black or white or mixed or what?
She was adopted into a Caucasian family.
Okay.
They had 7 children of their own when they adopted her. So she is the 8th child in a huge white family.
Okay.
And so it's interesting that you would ask that question. I was 17 years old, and really, as far as and and so ignorant about, I was ignorant about the racism side of it, even though I had, was a teenager during racial riots. um, I mean, even though my family was um, basically furious with me for getting involved with a black boy. Um, I had that, immature, naive idea that whatever family ended up adopting her, it would be all about the love. And as we were convinced as single and especially teenage single mothers, we were incapable of caring for a child. And any family that had 2 parents, a husband and a wife, was going to be better than anything we
Thank
could
you.
provide.
So
And there was no one in my family or in his family that ever extended, the thought that they would help me keep
Mhm,
her.
mhm.
And that was not on the table. And so my hope was just that she would be adopted into a loving family. And when I got the call from my social worker, because bless his heart, he did not have to communicate with me, because I had 6 weeks after she was born, I had gone to court and, signed the papers to release her. But he did keep in touch with me, and he called me to say she was placed when she was 3 months old. And I was so relieved. And all he said was that she was adopted into a professional family. He didn't, I never really knew. I
So you
assumed
know,
because of the town she was in that it was a white family,
okay,
but I didn't really know
okay.
for sure.
Did you have
But
a chance? Let me ask you, did you have a chance when you were in reunion and talking of seeing how that affected her in growing up?
yes, she often shared stories. She's a beautiful Black woman today. And she was very popular. On the one hand, she was a track star, she was a cheerleader, she was a ballerina. She had, she had a lot of opportunity. But in telling her story to me, especially as time went on, because I met her when she was 23, and the fracture in our relationship came in her late 40s. So as a woman, as a human, I suppose, but as a woman, I know how important those 40s are in trying to connect with who am I, and 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 what was really going on in my life. And she shared about, being made fun of. She shared about being called names. Her own father, who adored her, um, was a bit racist, talked about, used racial slurs in the house. She talked about her mom dressing her up in a Casper the Ghost costume when she was a child. She's like, what was she thinking? Things that, as I said, as time went on and she started to, kind of come into her own, or was attempting to, then she started to reflect back on her childhood in a whole different way. And I feel, and then she had a child as a 19-year-old, and her child is, her father was Caucasian, Italian, something. And so she's married to my daughter's married to a white man. I can see and feel, to the best of my white ability, how this might, I mean, it's a cluster of factors, as Damon was saying. I mean, you're adopted, the whole primal wound deal. Like,
Yeah.
in my memoir, and I have a blog, I've met other, other women especially seem to reach out to me. I have one new biracial friend that I met whose mother was Caucasian, whose father was is black. They're both still alive. And she met them after she met me, but she was raised in a black family. So, like that, my daughter has told me, why couldn't you have made sure I was placed in a black family? And
Wow.
that's just not the way it was done.
Right. Right.
It's just
Yeah.
not. It's just, no one asked me.
I know, because we're talking about the decades and difference between, for the 70s or whatever, whereas now open adoptions for us in that. So I would say for questions for both of you, what I guess things you would give people, both the moms as well as adoptees, of relating to this issue of race. True, it's in America, it's globally, and discussions and dialogues are needed for that. And I speak of this because each one of us holds a position in the triad, and that's just a whole different thing. And it's enough for us trying to figure out, and who am I really regarding even where I come from, and then it's race. And I'm asking this question because so many times I think with all the things meaning the birth moms, the adoptees first, birth moms and adopted parents have to deal with, how can we deal with all of this? And when I say put it in its place, not to make it separate, but for us to have a life of healing. And I always come back to healing because we've got to have a pathway to healing on whatever that is. And just, I hear you say, Damon, you felt like you were lucky of being in the family, your place and so forth, and having that surroundings and the love around you. Whereas Ruby, with you and your daughter, she's placed for us with a white family and her understanding her own identity, and you spoke about, and I want either one, both of you to talk about this, but I heard, Ruby, you said she never got to meet her black father. Did she speak about how maybe that was an issue?
Oh, it was a huge issue. And I stayed in, I met with him. I met her in 94. In 96, I happened to be in his home where he was living on business. And he did meet with me. I gave him photographs of her, and I gave him, and his granddaughter. And he never had any other children. He never did. He got married in his mid 40s for the first time. At the time, he wasn't married, and he told me he was going to call her. But as she moved, I kept in touch with him, and I kept encouraging him, please give her this. Because I, in conversation with her, could tell that she needed to connect with her Black heritage. She needed that biological connection. And she finally told me to stop contacting him. She said, his ongoing rejection, and she has come to believe that he was just too ashamed.
Right.
But what I remember her mother telling me, and I remember how it felt when she said it, and her mother's 20 years my senior. So we were like different generation, right? And she said, I have always told Angela that we don't see her as a Black person. And I thought, oh, horrors. Wow. But she's a Black person. This is, but I've heard that from other people. I've heard that in other adoption scenarios. Oh, we just see her as ours. We don't see her as a Black person or him. And so I have a friend who I met, who is a child psychologist and a Caucasian adoptive mother with a biracial daughter who is now in high school, and she's her father's Black, her mother is Caucasian, and she and I are in constant communication about, she likes hearing, she wants to hear about the trials and the trauma that my daughter experienced as an adoptee in a Caucasian home, in a Caucasian community, so that she can do things differently with her daughter. And she has.
Okay. Okay.
She's exposed her culturally. It's also an open adoption. So there has been,
Right.
I think, a reunion between her and her birth mother.
And I've heard some of those same things too, Ruby. I've heard people say, well, I'm colorblind. I don't see color. And how can you not see color? It's a difference in how you react to that color. So moving on, and
let me hit on one quick piece there, though, because I think this part is important. There's a lot of folks who say they don't see color, and it's obviously not true.
Right.
But I think what comes out when someone says, I don't see you as, basically means I don't see you as what you are. And that's
true.
That's right.
Right. So let's not lose what that language means. It's incredibly important. If you say I don't see you as Black, then you don't see me as who I am. And that therefore is a problem. Right. Because in many ways, the rest of the world does see me as Black. And that's an important thing for you to then tune into, because if you can't see it, then you're never going to understand how I might feel or not feel about certain issues. We may be congruent on some things and completely divergent on other things. And if you feel like you don't see me as Black, then when I say something like, I would like to go find my biological family, you're never going to make the connection that it's because I was raised in this community, this family, this whatever the thing is that doesn't mirror me, and I would like to go find that mirror. That's important to me as a person walking this earth. So I just wanted to make sure we didn't lose that piece.
It's a very important. And I've said before, it sounds like then you don't see me.
That's right. That's exactly what I'm saying. Yep.
And if we're talking about adoptees and the whole adoption triad, that digging deeper down, Damon, you don't see me who I am, and automatically adoptees will have the curiosity about who they are anyway, even that without even race. So it's even with that. So talking about healing, and there's so much healing that needs to get done, but I think people need to understand each other. And part of understanding each other is seeing how each one of us are, and us being able to say, this is who I am, and this is where I am, and this is what I need, and so forth. And I feel as if a lot of the breakdown, as you say, is with Ruby being a birth mom or adoptee, whether the mom, and you said, Damon, fortunately, your mother wanted to see you, because sometimes it could have been the other way. And if that was the other way, what effect does it have on you, and how can you heal from that? Because again, I listen to two birth mothers on the podcast, and I don't say half, but some moms have found their children, or some most recently, the past 2 or 3, the children have not wanted to reunite with them. And so some are handling it better than others, because that's the reality of it. So I say all the time, it's like, stay in acknowledging what it is, how it is, and where it is now. Because I'm always positive. This is where it is now. But what can I do now to deal with the situation I'm in now? Whether I'm in reunion with my child, whether I'm not in reunion with my child, whether it's going good, bad, ugly, and different, and so forth. But what do each one of you say to yourself in really dealing with, I say, the relationship? Now, unfortunately, Damon, your birth mom has passed away. But during the time you were in reunion, how did you manage that? And what did you need from her? What did she need from you? Or or giving any inclination to others on how to deal with it? I know everybody's different, but how did
Yeah,
it work for you?
everybody is different. You're right, and I think I align somewhat with the way that you are a person who comes from a place of positivity in
Mhm.
even in the most adverse situations.
Right, right.
And I was fortunate to have that perspective going in. And I also tend to try to empathize with other people so that I don't pass judgment as quickly or as deeply
Mhm.
without having trying to put myself in their position, because
Right.
that, I mean, it's totally inefficient to just do that. And so I tried to think about, if she was a young mother and if she didn't have the choices that she would have liked to have had, this was probably excessively tough on her.
Yeah.
So let me not try to judge the past, because guess what I can do about the past?
Right.
Absolutely
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah.
Zero.
Yeah.
So I took the approach in reunion that this is where we are now, and all we could do is work on going forward. I
Right.
was fortunate in that she was receptive to my emergence. There are folks, as you've alluded to, who don't get that receptivity. And so their healing is going to be completely different, because one of the things that I tried to do was be okay with, if she didn't want to reach out or didn't want to connect with me, that I would be fine.
Mm-hmm.
I was lucky that she did, so I didn't have to
Right.
test whether I would
Yeah.
actually be fine. I
Yeah.
might not have been fine. I might
Yeah.
have been completely messed up. I don't know that. And
Yeah.
some people are. And I think part of what is healing is being in spaces like this, in the
Yes.
community with people that can understand. Because what ends up happening is you, the adoptee, feel certain feelings, have had a certain experience of secondary rejection, or even just not non-response, and it might not be a rejection, but so you want to talk about it with folks, and you turn to your friends, and your friends can't relate at all, because they grew
Mm-hmm.
up with their family,
Right.
they know
Yeah.
their brothers and sisters, they
Yeah.
know their parents and all their aunts and uncles
Yeah.
and their history and heritage, and they
Yeah.
can't relate. So I think being in spaces like this where you can relate with other people, and I was on Facebook earlier today, and there's folks on there venting about their challenges and the feelings
Yeah.
that they've had with their family. It's incredibly important to be there, because there's 5, 10, 20, 50, 100 comments back to you saying, I went through that too. Here's how I dealt with it.
Right.
And I wish you well. And if you need help, I'm there for you. Like, there's a
Mhm.
lot of support. And I think that that is a key piece of the healing, is finding folks in communities like this, like on Facebook, like on other places, that
Mhm.
can relate to your experience and are not going to say things that suggest, I don't see you for who you are, because we're adoptees, we're birth mothers, we
Right.
get it with each other.
Right, right. Absolutely. And just to throw in another, I say wrench or so forth, is a lot of people don't talk about that they're adopted, or even
Mhm.
will go into these rooms, as you talk about, where support is there. Definitely find it on the birth mom side. I have interviewed some moms who said this was basically their coming out, that no one else had ever knew that they were a birth mom.
Yeah.
So Ruby, what's your side, or comments regarding healing in the relationship with your daughter, or just around? Because see, the other side of it, and I'm gonna bring this up, it's personal for me, is I, as a birth mom at 19, about to turn 20, didn't get the support from my family. In fact, it was a brick wall. And a family member just passed, my oldest brother, who was one of the ones who was not there. And so that brick wall is still there 50 years later. And it's like I've never stopped talking about it. Because if you remember my story the day when interviewed me, no, my family didn't ask me. I drove myself to the hospital, came home. No one asked me, have a boy or girl. I just announced I have a son. Whether they heard me, listened to me or not, I don't even know. I don't even know. So, you got the situation of people not even acknowledging the adoptees, their adoptee or the birth mom, not acknowledging they've had a child. So you've seen some coming out that's come out after years, and the story comes out, but then that person has been in all this pain and trauma and grief all these years. But I always talk before it's healing. So what about you, Ruben? For how do you progress with your daughter, or just with your family? Because you talked about for your family would not be accepting of the child, and that whole thing of the racist and all of that. So,
Yeah, it was. My brother was mayor of our city when I got pregnant, and my parents were very, very protective of his reputation. Ironically, he was not concerned. He unfortunately died when he was only 45 years old. But when I had gone to see, I had taken her father to see her, the baby, when she was a month old, and I set it up with my social worker, and the foster parents brought her to Catholic Social Services, and we visited her in a room, and I got a photo. And actually, my eldest brother, who was mayor, was the only person in my family who asked me. He asked me how I was doing, you know, after having had this child. And I said, I can't remember exactly what I said, but I said, I have a photo. And he said, can I see it? And my parents were in the room, and they were like statues. I don't remember them saying anything, but I went and got the photo, and I showed it to him, and he said, "Oh, look at that sweet baby face," and I will never forget that. That was the closest thing to acceptance I ever got from my family until the reunion. My father was ill, nearly gone at that time. He had cancer, and he called me and said, "I'm happy that you found your daughter. I do not want to meet her." And I believe, and maybe this is just daddy's girl believing, because it was horrible. The lack of support and the anger and um, the hurt looking in my parents' faces and the way they talked to me once they found out I was pregnant, and the miserable existence under that roof until I finally went to the home for unwed mothers when I was 4 months pregnant, which ended up being a respite for me because the ladies were nice to me there. It was a Salvation Army home. They were kind. There were many other pregnant girls there. The shame was not, hovering over me. I didn't have to feel that and look at that every single day. My struggle today is in healing. For my healing is I now feel this rejection. My daughter, who I knew for 25 years, basically, I feel has rejected me. And I feel like I have to suck it up because I feel I can't relate to the feelings that she has lived her whole life with in terms of who am I? Um, why did my family give me away? Um, the other part that is painful for me is that she actually has said to me, "You say that this is just the way it was, but this is just the way your family was." So I haven't
tell them about mine.
I haven't been able, I don't know where to go with that. So now she's feeling rejected by me because I have pulled away from the anger, because the last several years it's just been me sitting and listening to really her anger. I don't
Right.
want to get into specific details,
Yeah, sure, sure, sure.
and I want to protect her anonymity
Sure.
about it,
Totally.
but I end up in counseling, and the counselor's like,
Yeah.
"You just need to step back." But then I hear her saying, "You've got one foot out the door again. Of course you're going to reject me, but I feel
It's,
rejected." So and I
it's,
don't.
it's very hard because you do have to, for a birth mother, and I'll get Damon's opinion. Uh, when I say straddle, you've got to protect yourself. The perspective I take, ideally, is the fact that I need it and I want to be, and I need to heal myself to be the very best mom I can be for my son. Likewise, he's got to do his work. I've got to do my work. He's got to do his work, and let each other know in a very transparent, honest relationship, adult relationship. He'll be 48 this year. So this is an adult relationship. and understanding he needs to do his work, I need to do my work. And we need to be specifically, and I said this to him our first day we met. I don't want to ever lose contact or relation with you again. And he said the same thing. So if anything, my mind will go back. I've not had to go back and say, well, you remember what we said. I've never said that. But I go right back to that because that's what we both committed when we did find each other. And that was the whole thing I hold on to, is the fact no matter what, I will never leave him. And I've said those words to him. Now, how deeply it sinks in is relative to how receptive he is in that soil you plant a seed, but along with it through our actions and so forth, because a lot of times I think maybe adoptees and birth moms, they may want to reconnect and reunion, but it is so hard, or some of the feelings and emotions are so deep and they're not able to pull them up and work through them. And it's a lot of circumstances and situation. But I have just seen for my own personal, and for moms I've talked to, and a lot of adoptees do listen to Birth Moms Real Talk. And one big question they typically ask, why doesn't my mom want to meet me? Because if they've been rejected, they don't understand.
Yeah.
They don't understand. And sometimes it's maybe not rejection, but they feel it. And if they feel it, that's real.
That's right. If they
That's real.
feel it, it's real. And that is something that I'm trying to keep. I want to hold this space for her. And I want for her to know that, I mean, as I've said to her, the last thing I said to her when we spoke on the phone in October of 2020 was, I know I have no idea what it feels like to be you, but I promise you, you don't know what it feels like to be me. And and as we've discussed before, Yvonne, there's no other relationship for us to tap into and say, the last time I was in reunion with the child I surrendered to adoption, this is what I did.
Right.
I got nothing here.
There's no playbook.
And I just want to thank, Damon and both of you for, I've been listening to a lot of adoptees, and it's painful. It's painful to know the part that you played as a birth mother, regardless of the ignorance. I named the book I wrote Choiceless, and that really set her off because she was like, you were not choiceless. The point was that's the way it felt in 1970, 71 in the situation that I was in.
And likewise, when I say I take the position in holding responsibility, because I make this statement, whether you understand or not, I'm the adult. When I say I'm the adult, because I was a mother, my son had no choice in that. And anything in which we have a conversation about that, and it's not like the high road, but it's like, okay, I take everything he may say is for real with his feelings, because it is. Because it is. It's actually what he feels along with it. And I can see, and I've understood just by listening to adoptees and through conversations and dialogue with learning and healing with my son, it's like it's different every time. And it's that roller coaster, it's a step by step, it's that day by day, and just saying how you feel, whatever. He's foremost in my mind with everything that I live into. He's foremost, and giving to him what he needs to heal, because have done work, continue to do work day by day. And it's a day by day lifelong journey. This will never end. This will never end until it does with that.
Ruby, let me ask you, is she your daughter? Do you know, is she talking to other adoptees about her and their shared experience?
I don't know. In our last text exchange, I made the mistake. Pretty much anything I've tried to say in the recent past is not landed well. But I made the mistake of saying, we are, some of what's happening between us is textbook. And I was, sharing some of the groups that I've tapped into in the last several years, some of the books that I've read. And she fired back, "You're right, you are textbook." And so I'm not sure. I'm not sure what, I mean, I don't want to, there are some really militant folks out there. There are
Yeah.
birth moms that say all adoption is, criminal. I'm not one of those. I don't believe that. I will forever be grateful that the family that raised my daughter did so and loved her. But there's a lot of anger out there, and
Yeah.
I listen to it. So I don't know. I would hope. I know she was in counseling about racial identity with a counselor from New York, and that was a few years back. But
Yeah. I was just curious because, and I don't know your daughter and I don't know your situation, but I just feel like um, it doesn't it doesn't sound like, by the way you're describing what she has said so far, that she's really listening to other birth mom stories to try to gain some level of empathy as to what your situation could have been. Things
mhm.
like that's how your family was is sounds to me really singularly accusatory versus a, a consultation of the entire environment at that time in 1972. Anybody who gives that consideration should have some level of understanding, like, yeah, that would be a really tough thing to be, is a white woman with a black dad at a racially tense time with considerations for political and community and parents values and however they grew up. Like, it just, I'm hopeful that she's finding places to
Right.
talk about this with other people, because there are a lot of pieces to it. I'm looking at the book The Girls Who Went Away. That was incredibly eye-opening for me, and I've had a
So
lot of,
glad you read that. Yeah,
yeah, I
yeah.
mean, because there's no, until Birth Moms Real Talk came along, I didn't really know of any other place to hear where birth mothers were expressing what they had been through. And
Mhm.
that book takes you back
Yeah.
to that time, to that era, to
Yeah.
the methodologies,
Yeah.
to the principles, to the misplaced science, I mean, just everything. It just takes you from here and puts you back there and says, this is what it was probably like. And for me, it was incredibly enlightening. And I'm hopeful that she's, as Yvonne has said, taking the time to do her own work. It sounds like
Right.
she's in therapy, but like, you got to sit with the empathy and the alternate perspective of what you did actually go through, not just blaming your family, but
Right.
considering the entirety of the environment.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I agree.
We've got one other. We have a few more minutes left, like
Yes.
7 minutes, but we've got Courtney. Courtney, welcome. Can you unmute your mic and identify yourself? She's another Black birth mom. So I want her to share. Can you hear us,
Well,
Courtney?
hi. Good
Hi.
afternoon, everyone. How are you?
Good,
Good, good.
good.
Courtney.
Good. So really quickly, my name is Courtney. I'm a birth mom. My son is he'll be 22 this year. We are not in reunion as of yet, which is perfectly fine. It's his choice. Whenever he's ready, I will be ready. So I'm glad to be here to listen in.
Thank you, Courtney. So we've covered the topics. Ruby, give a short introduction of yourself and Damon.
I'm Courtney. I'm a birth mom. My daughter is 51 years old this year, and she is her father was Black. I am Caucasian, if you can see me, and and so I've just been talking about my experience back in the late 60s, early 70s in a biracial relationship, and ending in surrendering a child to adoption, and a subsequent reunion that I had with her for 25 years. So glad you're here.
Thank you,
I'm,
Damon.
I'm Damon Davis. I'm the host of the Who Am I Really podcast. I interview other adoptees about their journeys through adoption and their attempts to find their biological family members. I'm also an adopted person in a homogenous family with Black parents. and I'm an adoptive parent. I have two older adoptees, they're 25 and 27. And we're just kind of talking about all of the various adoption experiences that we've had and across sort of the racial spectrum and what it takes to heal.
Absolutely. And regarding the healing, what I know you had said, and thank you, Damien, for that last comment to Ruby, is I'll say that my son wanted, shortly after we met, because it was a 3-year period of time from the time I found him to he was ready to talk. And he came back and said he was hi, that started a relationship. And one of the first things he said to me, I realize what you have gone through. Not only about the time, because he didn't know me. He didn't know he was adopted. He was 13. So it was all of that was transpiring. So when he did hear the story, and I told him the whole story, when we first basically talked on the phone, it was like over 2 or 3 months before we met in person. And he said, not only for what I went through in the birth itself, but for my search. And I remember him saying, it was 45 years when we met. He said, you have searched for me for 45 years. How did you do it? Not how did you do it, but it was like amazing. And that was the point. You've been through a lot. I mean, you were really, and I was telling him, was able to show him some journals I had written like 30 years ago. And I would say, I will meet my son one day. And maybe that made a difference or whatever, but it was like, he seemed like he was like amazed that I was never giving up. He was first in my life regarding that. And that was how he was saying that and that was on the time we said we will never lose connection again. And so again, I do believe for healing comes in with communities and support groups and whatever that you're in with that. Just as Damon said. So Courtney, if you want to give some last comment before we have to close out about what has healed you. And you mentioned you're not in reunion with your son. You have no way your son is, but he's not ready for reunion now. Correct?
Correct. Healing for me took time. It took years and tears and therapy, honestly, as well as sharing my story with others. As I mentioned, it's my son's decision when and if he wants to meet me. I made a huge decision when I was a teenager and scared and pregnant, but I have to be understanding of the fact that just because my goal and desire is to meet this being doesn't necessarily mean that that's his goal or desire in the moment. And so my healing also included coming to that realization, because when I first placed him, my thoughts were, when he's 18, I'm going to reach out and meet him. And I had to slowly come to that realization. It's not about me. It's about him. It's about his needs. It's about his healing, his journey. And so that, I think, was the ultimate level of healing for me, was realizing it's not about me. So, yeah.
Let me share something with you, Courtney. One of the things that my social worker told me when I first launched my reunion journey is that women tend to search earlier than men do. And my theory is because women can acknowledge more earlier that they can conceive. From the time that your menstrual cycle starts as a young teenager, probably, you then are able to identify potentially as a mother. And so I think there's also more emotional intelligence we can, if we're honest with each other, with among women with men. So y'all,
can I post that on my Facebook?
Yeah.
Would you like to use my picture as the poster child for the guy who said that?
Yeah.
But the other thing, Courtney, that I would say is that she told me that men tend to search when they have their first child.
Yeah.
And that was exactly what happened for me. So, I think you can, if you rely on certain facts based on what my social worker said, it's likely that he'll reach out at one of those at that time. So just hold out hope that on his own journey, it's entirely likely that it might be around the time he has his first kid that he actually decides that he's interested in knowing who you are more closely.
Thank you.
Very good. Last thoughts before we close out. Anyway,
I just thank you. I just have to say thank you to anybody and everybody who's participating. There were so many years of shamed silence for me, and I gave that up several years back, and continuing the conversation, and especially in this extra level of the racial part of adoption is huge. I know that now. I know that today.
Yeah. Very good.
Yeah. Seconded. I'm going to say to Ruby, I'm really glad that you're here and speaking about your experience, because I think that it is lost on some folks what it was like to be in an interracial relationship, as it were, producing a interracial child, and to be concerned about that child's welfare, and to be in the position that you are now of trying to help her with her own identity, which straddles two races at a tense time for this country and really globally. And so I'm glad for you and for Courtney, for birth mothers in general, speaking out about what your experience has been, because we adoptees don't know. We weren't there.
Right.
We were little and had no choice in the matter. And
Right.
we, as sort of the children of the situation, grow up with the notion that you had the choice. But many of your voices are explaining that the choices were not, they were not present at all,
Right.
as your book would indicate. You were choiceless in many situations. And so I'm
Yeah.
just appreciative of you all being here. You, of course, Yvonne, as well as the host, who's helping
Always.
bring these stories to light. All three of you, I think it's really, really important
Very
for you to
good.
tell these stories,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of misinformation.
Yes,
Thank
it's
you.
needed. It's needed. And a lot of times I will say that Birth Moms Real Talk is a platform where adoptees and all other people, even outside of the constellation of adoption, can put your ear there and listen. That's where you hear the real story. Because people don't know. You can't expect people to know something unless they've listened and heard people say that. So thank you all for tuning in to Facebook Live. Thank you, Ruby. Thank you, Damon. Thank you, Courtney. Tune into the podcast. Courtney's podcast will launch next Saturday. So stay tuned.
Woo-hoo. I'm there. I'm there.
Like us on Facebook, Instagram. If you like what you're hearing on Facebook Live as well as the podcast, support us on Patreon. Go into our website, birthmomsrealtalk.com. Join our village. We have a village for these birth moms. It takes it greater and deeper than that support. We are there with you as the village. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.